Are we live then?
We're live.
Excellent. Hello everyone. My name is Vincent and thank you very much for coming tonight. We are NCan, the Newcastle Students Climate Action Network. We're also joined here today by Rachel Armstrong and Ed Wainwright, the recently appointed climate literacy tutors here at Newcastle University. And we'll be hoping to have a quick discussion with them later about their new roles here. If you have any questions for us or for Ed and Rachel, please stick them in the chat. And we will come back to these in a bit later. We're just going to share our screen now. We've got a couple of slides. And so talking about us as NCan, we are starting this group in response to the ongoing climate crisis. We feel that we are not prepared enough moving forward into our careers, and we want to provide a platform for the voices of architectural students here at Newcastle. The built environment directly contributes to approximately 40% of the UK's carbon emissions, and arguably much more due to the impact architecture has on our lives and the planet's ecologies. So practitioners can play a key role in this. We are creatively campaigning for a greater emphasis on ecologies and sustainability in our architectural education. And we believe that we need to be provided with the awareness and the knowledge to truly practice sustainably in our future careers. I'm going to pass over to Kate now.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate. So just a bit about who we are. We're a group of MArch students who started meeting together in January with hopes to expand and become a representative body of the whole school. We want to use our agency as students to promote intersectional and positive solutions, and we feel that collective action will bring around positive and meaningful change. We're creating this group as part of the emerging network of climate action groups across architecture schools in the UK and abroad. If you want to get involved, all of our social media links are in the YouTube description. Today, we'll be discussing the work that we have conducted so far. This is through a collective and reflective manifesto, which highlights issues and evokes questions through our previous projects, our proposed organisational setup, and a discussion with climate literacy tutors Ed Wainwright and Rachel Armstrong. Finally, we will have some audience participation and a bit more of a chat about how to get involved. So I'm just going to go on to Menti to kind of get some audience participation now. So if you can go across to, I'll just share my screen so it makes this one. So that should be sharing. So if you can go across to menti.com, which is shown on the screen, type the code in, and then we'll give kind of 5 minutes to answer this question with a couple of words.
So the code, just to read it out for you guys, if you can't quite see it, it's 83, 89, 42, and 5. So we'll just give you a couple of guys a little bit of time to fill that in. And we're just asking you on what your immediate emotional response is to the climate crisis. We're expecting quite a vivid emotional response here. We just want you to put a couple of quick words in. So yeah, a lot of people feeling overwhelmed, unprepared, scared, anxious, frustrated. I can completely agree with you all there.
There's a couple of hopefuls and optimistics as well.
Yeah, I think it is good to be positive in this case as well. So yeah, thank you very much for filling that in, and good to know that there's some of you getting on. And we might just give this another couple of seconds or so. But yeah, I think we've got some more comments here, and yeah, just looking. Generally, those quite vivid emotional thoughts there about people feeling overwhelmed and a bit like that. So I think one of the things that we're looking to do with the Climate Action Network is to be able to bring together some of those emotions and some of those fears that we all have as a group, and really bring it together into something positive that we can move forward together as a force for change and a force for really bringing the student collective together as a whole, which I think will be able to bring together a really powerful student collective here at Newcastle. I'm just going to pass over to Jay now, who's going to be discussing some of these themes in a bit more detail. We've been looking to create a manifesto of sorts, which we've been working on over the past couple of weeks or so. And I'm just going to pass over to Jay now, who'll be able to talk a bit more in detail about that.
Yep, thanks guys, and thanks everyone who's commented on the YouTube there. So in order to clarify our stance on climate change, we've decided to write a manifesto. So we're going to use this to set up the identity of the group and the social media as we move forward. And so far we're focusing around the 3 points of decarbonising, ecological regeneration and cultural transformation. But we didn't want the manifesto to just be a rigid, bulleted A4 document. We wanted it to be something fluid, constant evolution of ideas, something personal and representative of Newcastle students, telling our stories, frustrations, and our passions. We're keen for this document to be a platform for the students to voice themselves in creative and humorous ways, and using our positions as students and designers to think optimistically and exploratively of ways to combat climate change. These proposals do not have to be grounded in reality, and we're hoping our passion and optimism will help define our voice here at Newcastle. We're hoping that as the document evolves, it will show where we've been and where we're going by incorporating statistics and audits as we work alongside Ed and Rachel to increase the school's climate literacy. We see this document as a progression over time, illustrating ours and the school's developing understanding, but also highlighting our desire to learn more. Additionally, this could become a tool set or a reference point for sustainable ideas that we can share. In the architecture profession, there's currently a pretense to originality that everything has to be redesigned and rethought out. We don't want to think this all out. We want to pull from everyone's collective knowledge. For instance, our studio members have been given weekly presentations on climate topics that they've been studying and are truly passionate about. So there's no point us trying to write about these topics when everyone else has been studying it for months. So far, we've pulled together some of the work we've produced and we've put it in an InDesign document, and we've begun to incorporate some questions and feedback from other students in workshops we've run already. But the end goal is to have something which is more of a continuous blog that challenges hierarchy and gives everyone an equal voice and a platform to speak. So we want to hear from those of you who want to contribute work and who want to get involved. And hopefully the contact details are in the chat in the YouTube video. So I'm going to hand back over to you, Vincent.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Jay. That's exactly what we're looking to do over the next couple of months and years, hopefully, as this project evolves. What we're hoping to do with this manifest is it will be this evolving, fluid device, really, for illustrating some of the issues that we have come up with. And so what we've decided to do here is put to you guys the work that we have done so far in creating that manifesto. We've each prepared a couple of questions to ask each other, and which will be on topic of our previous work that we've done over the past couple of years or so, starting to expose issues through our reflective practice in that regard. The current work you can see on the screen is from Charlie, and I'm just going to pass over to him now so he can explain a bit more about that.
Thanks, Vinny. Hi, I'm Charlie, and this manifesto page kind of showcases and critiques a piece of my work. It's an early concept model cast in plaster, and in a nutshell, I was kind of exploring rewilding and how the built environment and plants kind of coexist and interact.
So what does rewilding mean to you?
So it's kind of a big question, but I think I'm just going to use a bit of research to kind of help me answer it. So it's estimated that without the existence of humans, there would naturally be something like an extra 0.9 billion hectares of forest on Earth, with around 4 million hectares more just within the UK. So in a way, it's about the massive impact that we as humans have had and trying to kind of make up for that. So as if we kind of owe it to nature, now we understand how destructive as a species we are. So I think I'm just going to pass over to Sarah now to talk a bit about her work.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, so this is also an experimental model similar to yours. It was actually from my undergraduate project in third year, and I was exploring how pre-used materials and how they could be incorporated within design. The whole thing was a bit of an experimentation, and I think I went into it expecting it to be much more sustainable than it ended up being. I mean, Charlie, I'm sure you remember.
Yeah, I do remember, and I remember the kind of material choice being a little controversial in the end.
Yeah. So it certainly didn't turn out initially how as sustainable as I thought it might be. So I ended up using resin to bind all of the bricks together, which in many ways completely defies the point. But I suppose I was trying to prove a point by exploring how existing materials could be used alongside and within new design proposals, opposed to being disregarded. Though in reflection, I'm not sure if this is actually more detrimental. Regardless, it's interesting to reflect on. But if we move on to the next slide as well, this is also a piece of research that I did last semester, looking at the carbon output of a child from varying backgrounds. And it's from a book called How Bad Are Bananas, which I really recommend. It's a really easy, straightforward read, and it literally lists the carbon output of everything. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I think I'll pass on to Vinny to talk about his linked research project next.
Thank you very much. So yes, this is a slide which shows an image from our live build project that myself, Kate, and a couple of others in Stage 6 have been working on up at Northumberlandia. We have been trying to integrate some sustainable practice themes into our work. We've been thinking about the existing ecologies on the site and the habitats of some of the wildlife that exist there, but also been trying to think about circular economy as well, and how could our project be repaired and eventually dismantled.
Is there anything that you would do differently next time?
Yeah, so I think we would hope to use more local materials. We eventually chose a material that originates from Spain. It's a type of plywood that has quite a lot of resin and glue in it as well. So it does have a quite high embodied carbon. And we would hope that it could be recycled or reused, but at the end of the day, we're not really sure about whether this would work or not.
And what about your design work as well?
Yeah, this is a sort of the complete opposite really, as I feel like I've not really addressed sustainability enough in my work so far. This is a slide from my work last year where I was looking at some historical themes in Belfast. I'm hoping to be a lot more focused this year and use some of those historical themes, but with a bit more of an ecological practice focus. So I'm just going to pass over to Jay now to discuss his work that he's been doing this year.
Yeah, thanks, Vinny. So to take it back from reality into the conceptual, the project I've been developing in our Unlearning studio has been looking at the coal industry in Newcastle and how damaging that's been historically to the local community, especially in terms of land privatization and pollution. And my proposal begins to ask the question, should we be responsible over carbon debt? And it seeks to address this pollutant heritage in Newcastle through the use of carbon capture machines that directly suck carbon out of the atmosphere, healing the landscape and focusing around community rather than privatized industry.
So how applicable do you feel that these technologies are in the current climate context?
I'd like to think as possible, but really I feel it's essential. And if we want to start healing, we have to start removing carbon from the atmosphere because it doesn't just disperse with time. I suppose the other difficult question is to impose responsibility of past CO2 emissions. But one thing we can do is to tax carbon so that we're paying the true cost of emissions, especially for big corporations, not too dissimilar from the 5p tax on plastic bags.
Yeah. So maybe changing tack slightly a bit, how important is it for community to be involved and not just the climate action side like our project, but developing it into more of a social responsibility?
Yeah, good question. I think it's essentially really because a lot of the changes we've seen here lately have come from community and this grassroots foundation. And I feel a lot of us in this call, and I'm sure a lot of people watching, are frustrated with politics right now and the lack of commitment by our government to climate change, or in fact that they're going in the complete wrong direction. So it's this collective consciousness that starts change. And I hope NCan will prove to be a testament to that. So this is just an essay I wrote on similar issues around community, building off that design project. And it focuses around inequality, racism, and economics under capitalism. And essentially, these are all things we're going to have to address before we can move towards meaningful climate action. So I'm going to hand over to Natasha now.
Thanks. So carry on with essay writing. This is a snapshot from my undergraduate dissertation. I looked at the emergence of an eco-consciousness, and the image shows an article from 50 years ago in an architecture magazine, and it states things like needed life support systems for a dying planet, and it calls out to architects and air breathers. And it literally shows a picture of a dying Model Earth being suffocated by a plastic bag. And the imagery is very drastic and radical. And it sums up my frustration as like not enough has changed from then till now.
So what made you write about this dissertation topic?
I actually started looking at the penguin pool at London Zoo, a concrete penguin enclosure that was supposedly designed for animals, but the penguins' feet ached from using it. And this led me to question our human-centric approach towards design and our relationship with humans and the environment. So now I'm going to pass over to Sammy, who's going to talk about his design project.
Hi everyone, and thanks Natasha. Yeah, it's been really interesting for me to get involved here at NCan, purely because my design work since I joined the MArch programme has been mostly stuck to a theoretical brief, and with that I think it's often seen as disregarding sustainability from its programme. So yeah, the central drawing here is taken from a Stage 5 project. In brief, the excavation was conceived as a way of disturbing fascist ideology from Mussolini's fascist house in Italy. But what's interesting is that in developing this manifesto, we've had some really exciting conversations about peace and how it may be reinterpreted, even though sustainability was never really a part of this conception. One analogy referred to violence to the earth and whether or not that is any more acceptable than violence to humans, and then whether or not those are synonymous. In another talk, we reflected on the impact of mining and the kinds of technology that we should maybe think about not using going into the future.
Do you still think there's a place for theory-based utopian studios, or should all studios be grounded in sustainability now?
I think it's important not to disregard what the theory is attempting to do, and for me it's an attempt to return agency to the architects in what's been a pretty rough ride for the profession since the 50s. So yeah, I think theory is still massively important. This brief in particular is looking at a very real problem inside the discipline. And you might argue that addressing the climate crisis may be problematic if we can't first resolve the internal contradictions of our own practice. And yeah, I think that concludes this segment. I think I'll now hand it back over to Jay. We'll talk through a workshop we done last week with the MArch programme.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, guys. So really, that's just a flavour of things we've been working with as a group here. We're really interested to get everyone else involved and contribute and work. So as Sammy said, we ran our first workshop with our Unlearning studio last week. And we're planning to run workshops and have conversations sort of on a weekly basis. So we asked our studio 5 questions to try and get an understanding of the personal voices of Newcastle. And in the spirit of evolving the manifesto, we've begun to incorporate these into the document and see the evolution.
So Jay, how did you think this workshop actually turned out for us and for the people that came along to it?
Yeah, I think it went great. I feel for many of us, it was one of the first times we got to talk about our work with other studios. And especially in this sort of Zoom world environment that we're in right now, it's just good to open up a sort of reflective dialogue and get talking. So it'd be great to see more contribution, collaboration, and sustainability chat in the school as we move forwards. Right, so that's the end of the manifesto. Again, please send in work, please get involved. We really want it to be about the voices of Newcastle and not just us. So moving on, we're going to head over to Menti again, and we're going to put to you another question. How can we respond to the climate crisis?
So again, yeah, please go to menti.com, or I think if you've still got the tab open, it should refresh from last time. I see a couple of the answers from the last one. I mean, I hope those are answers from the last one have carried over. And then also, yeah, just put that code in again. So it was at 83, 89, 42, 5. And then, yeah, the question is, how can we respond to the climate crisis? And yeah, lots of great words coming in. So better practice, education, voting is key. Being optimistic, I think that's a great outlook.
Also join NCan.
Join NCan, that's possibly one that we'll be pushing a lot of. In that I hope that we can use our agency and our collective nature as a group to bring at least some change and get some rolling from our end as practitioners. Planning, we've got understanding, educating ourselves, research and using our learning here at the school to add to that. Creativity, engagement, all really great ideas, and we hope that we at NCan can provide a bit of a platform for some of those wishes and some of those actions for us to take forward into our futures, really. So the big one, join NCan. We've got some more information coming up, I think, from we've still got some great stuff coming through. So environmental focused work, that's key. Legislation, that's the big one. So there's so many different topics and so many different themes that we can get involved in as architects, and as planners, and as other people working in the urban environment. And there's so much just to get involved in. And I'm now going to pass over to Sarah now, who's going to discuss a bit more about getting involved in NCan, what that means, what our organisational strategy is, and some more of our social side as well. So over to Sarah.
Thanks, Vinny, and thanks everyone for answering the Menti as well. That was a good response. So the past couple of months have consisted mainly of weekly informal catch-ups over Zoom. Hopefully these will be able to be in person sometime soon. We've had many discussions talking about NCan and our aims and personal motives and what we're trying to achieve as a group. We also have a WhatsApp with information and general chat. The links to this can be found sort of within the link tree, which is on all of our social media, and in the description box below as well. We have obviously our social media pages, which are great for keeping up to date. They're at NCL on Instagram and Twitter, and our LinkedIn is just NCan. We plan to share information alongside relevant student work on here, which again, we're really keen to get contributions for. As well as things like articles, podcasts, and a lot of other stuff. And we also have plans to turn our manifesto into a blog or website. So keep an eye open for that, because that'll be shared on our social media as well. And do get in touch with us if you want to be involved in that or have any cool ideas, because we're really keen for contribution. Additionally, we also hope to send out a form of questionnaire or survey in the near future. This is going to aim to assess the climate literacy across the whole school, as well as willingness to get involved with us too. So I'm going to pass on to Natasha to talk about inter-university collaboration that we're doing.
We have been cooperating with other universities and organisations. We have a couple of members from Northumbria too, and are hoping to do more collaborative work with them in the future. We are also in contact with other groups around the country through ACAN, Architects Climate Action Network, who launched their Students Can campaign last Tuesday. ACAN has been a great help and resource in helping us get moving here in Newcastle, and we share the can at the end of our name as a nod to them and the network across the country. We plan to keep in contact with them and coordinate inter-school events and workshops. We hope that everyone can use our framework here at Newcastle to promote existing events, talks, podcasts run by other schools and student groups.
Thanks, Natasha. So we also have leading members in non-graduating years as well, so as to keep continuity. And operating outside of any specific society means that we have a great amount of freedom, but it does also mean that we would need to source our own funding if we wanted to do things like bring in speakers and run workshops. We hope that from this we can build a platform and spaces for debate, and we also hope to have strong links between students and tutors. So Ed Wainwright and Rachel Armstrong, who are on the stream with us now, are our newly appointed schools climate literacy tutors, and we hope that we can assist them in voicing ideas and proposals. So I'm going to pass over to Ed and Rachel now, if that's okay, to briefly introduce yourselves before we move on to a few questions.
Great, hi. Hi everyone. I'm Rachel Armstrong, and I'm working with Ed Wainwright as a climate literacy tutor. I'm a professor of experimental architecture here at Newcastle University. And I'm excited about the initiative of NCan because we're in very interesting times. We're standing between the industrial and ecological era. And the photograph behind me here is a rare image taken on 19th of July 2013, where the wide-angle camera on the International Cassini spacecraft has captured Saturn's rings and our planet Earth and Moon in the same frame. So Earth's 1.44 billion kilometers away in this image, and it appears as a little blue dot at the center right. And the moon you can just about see as a fainter protrusion off to its right side, and the other bright dots around are stars. And this is the third time only that the Earth has been imaged from the outer solar system. So the first image was taken by NASA's Voyager in 1990, famously entitled The Pale Blue Dot. And in 2006, Cassini also imaged Earth in Saturn's shadow. But this is the first time we were aware we were being photographed from outer space, and in a moment of celebration, but also a time for self-reflection. We may have traveled 1.4 billion kilometers, but how much have we actually changed since the Earthrise photograph taken in 1968 during the Apollo 8 mission? These photos from space are actually a poetry of awareness about our vulnerable predicament of issues of scale, where we're not in competition with each other, but must work together to stay alive, to honor the precious space we live in, only, which is, only by leaving the planet could we begin the ecological movement to recognize that we're actually all in this, kind of incredible space, but a very fragile one together. And really with these images, we're starting to see that our planet is not infinite. The resources here do not go on forever, but they're diminished, fragile, and yet whole. So how can we actually help it stay that way? So I'm, I just want to just say that I think that the NCan initiative is incredibly important, and I think we actually need to think about this issue for climate change in its historic sense, in the poetry of life in which we're all in place and which we're all trying to contribute through the amazing profession of architecture.
Fantastic, thanks, Rachel. Well, it's a real honour to work with you guys as part of the kind of climate literacy and change program here that we're just launching today. And just as Rachel was talking, I kind of realised that throughout the entirety of this pandemic, I've been sat in this little office. So I'm from the kind of interplanetary reaches of Rachel. You come zooming back down to the very grounded realities of me in an architecture school, in an office, looking out a window at a building site as they've been recladding the towers opposite us on campus. And I've been reflecting that all of the architecture that I see going up, being built, being produced right now is the direct product of a highly energy intensive, highly carbon intensive, petrochemical base industrial process. Everything I see, from the gas coming out of the boiler, to the computer screen left on at night, to the scaffolding, to the cladding that's made out of various composite materials, all extracted from the earth, that we operate within a set of logics that haven't really been treating that pale blue dot that sits behind Rachel's shoulder particularly well, certainly in a Western world, and certainly for the last sort of 200 years, 300 years or so. And it strikes me that this is an incredibly valuable moment, and a really valuable moment to work with you as the future generations of the architectural community, really. And this is your opportunity and our opportunity to reflect on what it means to see the entirety of that population of people, non-people beings, non-humans that sit behind Rachel's shoulder, and how our built environment are contributing to the sustenance of life here on Earth. And I find myself every time I come into the office and every time I work with you as a collective, as we begin to work more closely as a collective, feeling a kind of sense of growing hope at the possibility of changing, not initially the world that we're in, not the built environment we're in immediately. That's a long-term change. That's a load of solid material and mass that we've got to work with. But changing the way we think, changing our ideas, and changing our ethics, and beginning to think through questions of connection, questions of care, and questions of love, effectively, for the world that we're inhabiting and the way that we're making things in it. And so I think it's a real privilege to join you guys tonight to help kind of launch this new program, because I think it has to be a joint effort. It actually has to be an effort where your impetus, you're holding us to account as well as people that are, you know, deeply involved in developing your pedagogical, your learning environment here, so that we do begin to make substantive and long-lasting changes that recognise both the fragility but the, you know, incredible beauty of that pale blue dot and how we live on it, really. So yeah, thank you for inviting us.
Thanks, Ed and Rachel, for that. Very inspiring, as always. It's incredible to think of the fragility of the planet now as we visualize it from space, and some great comments on extractivism there, Ed, at the sort of more intimate level. And of course, we all look forward to working with you on this as well. So Ed, as you were saying, on the subject of changing the ways we think, I've just got a couple of questions to put to you both. I'll just get straight into that. In your new roles, what will your first aims be, and what do you think needs to change?
If I may, is that all right, Rachel? I'll jump in. What are the first things we'll do? Is that what your first part of that question was? So, I mean, for me, the first things we'll do, I think, has to be to connect into the question of the changes that we're currently experiencing. It's been part of my own sort of personal experience or personal sort of journey into gaining some degree of literacy around what is occurring. It's been a process of confronting some realities of the changing environment that we live in, and that's confronting realities that are both the changing climate, you know, the heating climate, but also the realities of affects and impacts on people and creatures' lives, you know, in this world, and seeing the injustices, seeing the suffering that's caused by the actions of the kind of cultures that we've been building and constructing. And part of that journey for me has been really confronting that as an emotional experience, as something that has made me need to change. So it's not that it's an option, it's not that it's sort of like an interesting hobby or an adjunct to what I ought to be doing otherwise. It's compelling, it's absolutely compelling. And the motive force behind that kind of compulsion to want to change and want to explore what this means has come through learning, has come through engaging and understanding a little bit, you know, gradually. And admittedly over the pandemic in quite an accelerated manner, what's happening at the moment. So the first thing for me that I think I would like to do is to work with both yourselves, students in the school, and with our wonderful and supportive colleagues, is to look at what we currently know, what we currently don't know, and what we feel about it, how we connect to that, and some of the realities of the significant changes that we're undertaking, how we respond to that emotionally, how we connect to that change. Because it's only through establishing that mode of working, that way of connecting, that I think we'll be able to form a real kind of compulsion, a real will to be able to shift how we're thinking about our built environment, really. So yeah, that's my. Was there another part of the question? That was enough.
And what do you think needs to change?
Oh goodness, lots and lots and lots of things. The stuff that is outside of my window and the rationales and logics that go towards thinking that we can dig down, take it and sort of gobble it down and then do as we will with it. I think for me, it's the ethics that sit behind our relationship to how we take things from and with the world effectively. That's very nebulous, and I'm sure we'll get onto something more significant, or not significant, but more specific. But for me, it's changing how we understand our values, what we value, our value frameworks, I suppose you'd say.
Rachel, would you like to answer the same question?
Yeah, so I guess in the new roles that we have, I in some ways they're an extension of our old roles, except now formalised within the school environment. And there's a certain amount of formalism that we'll be doing, which is really taking stock of where we're at the school. So our motivation is to actually bring about curriculum change, and that's a motivation that's also shared by the school, and we need your help to do that. We are going to, Ed and I are going to help identify strengths and weaknesses within the department, but we really need, your eyes on the ground and, your thoughts about what you think you need that we're missing in order to provide you with something that's really useful to you. And I think I think both Ed and I would say that bringing climate literacy into the heart of the studio is really what we would say needs to happen. I think what we wouldn't say needs to happen is to tell you what you need to learn, but we have a range of different perspectives that we need to accommodate within a studio and kind of the studio space and learning environment. So those are formal, things like the REBA and ARB criteria, things like kind of university rules and regulations and, themes and kind of grand challenges. But I think really the heart is, supporting and empowering you guys because we don't know the answers. I think this is this is like one of those subjects where there really isn't an expert who can tell us what the answer is, or isn't an expert who can tell us what all the curriculum should be. But we can support and inform and empower you. And I think both Ed and I are really committed to do that. And I think saying that, we're really excited about the NCan initiative. And I really think that even though you may not be an official group so far, I think that there are things that the pandemic has highlighted, which are actually opportunities. And I heard about the, not having money means that, maybe you can't have a speaking program that, may be ideal. But you know what? I think Zoom is an incredible opportunity to connect globally. And it may be that you connect beyond the, national initiative, and maybe you start to forge some conversations between people in very different kinds of environments with very different educational needs. I was doing a workshop with Digital Futures World over the summer, and it was amazing. We had students who didn't have to pay for their education, which was a real treat for them to be in an educational environment. So everything was held on Zoom. But we had people from India, South America, the Far East. And it was incredible to see everybody from these different time zones in the same space, asking questions about, the pandemic and how design can actually help us and understand this, kind of strange interruption of our expectations. But I think I think Ed's point really about the pandemic is a really interesting one, because I think it's playing out a microcosm, not just of possible change, but also the resistance that you guys are going to encounter in any move towards changing anything. So Ed and I are here to help. But what I mean by resistance is that a lot of us want to return to normality. And that might be a problem. And that might be a problem, when we're thinking about what is it that needs to shift in this opportunity in order to take us closer to the climate change agendas that we really kind of want to interrogate. So, I'm not just going to paint it as unlimited opportunities and everything. This Ed, I, and the school will support you all the way. But as young professionals that will be keen on bringing about change, there's a lot of inertia, a lot of resistance. There's a lot of very comfortable people doing things that are comfortable for them, but it's your generation that is the most exposed by many of the things that we're currently facing. And I actually attended the ACAN event earlier this week, and I was inspired. I was inspired that your generation is really committed to taking action. I also believe that NCan has a unique perspective, and it would be so great to help you develop your own identity and perspective. I thought the manifesto was a great starting point. And I also think that although, maybe things that haven't happened yet in terms of ambitions for bringing about change, although they may not have happened yet, I think imagine and creativity are actually part of our reality. It's just one whose values are easily dismissed, and those values are very much, placed within design. So really, I'm excited to be part of this, and I'm excited that you've invited us to, share this initiation or launch of your group. And we're really keen to see what happens next.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think what you both touched on was this sort of emotion and this personal narrative. Not so much, there's not so much certain things to change, but it's going to be the voices and that emotion that's going to drive this group. So I think we're going to head over to Sammy now with the YouTube comments and put it to everyone who's watching, if they have any questions for us at NCan.
So we were hoping to get a few comments. I guess that's our key really. If anyone watching has any burning desires or questions they want to get to the group, just drop them in the chat. I'm aware we've got about a 20-second delay, so we'll give it some time. But yeah, like I say, if you've got any questions, just let us know. We'll try to respond to them.
Can I ask you guys a question whilst we're waiting for questions to come in?
Yeah, of course.
So, seeing as we have you here and we're together and we've got a chance to kind of speak in a public forum, what would you want to hold us accountable for? What would you want us to hold us accountable for in this role that we've got now?
I think that's a really great question, and I guess it's a bit hard for us as students to visualize and sort of grasp tangible change. We understand, I think, what we want to get to and what we can achieve as a whole and holistically, but it's those specific steps in terms of focusing a curriculum that fits to our desires and our emotions that I think we need to work with you and hold you accountable for helping us achieve and the whole school achieve. Really, it's that focusing of the limitations of perhaps that we as students, I think we understand that we don't know everything yet, and we probably won't know everything at some point later on down the line, but it's that sort of need that we have that we'll be able to link what we're feeling at the moment with those sort of changes in the curriculum and what our experiences here at Newcastle, I think, is going to be really key.
When we had the kind of workshop with the first studio, which was a bit of a test run for us last week, we were kind of asking people what they would want from their education and what they've had kind of previously. And there are kind of comments that often the kind of climate literacy part of it and sustainability and the more technical side of it is often kind of added on to the end of the projects. I think by having an education that provides it as a bit more of a portion and more of a driver and more supported, it means we can kind of include it from very early stages of our design project, which then gives the most potential to have a better education and to be for it to be a lot more kind of better understood. So I think it's things like that, making sure that it isn't like a side part of our kind of education, and that it becomes much more kind of well-rounded and kind of encompassed in what we do right from the beginning of kind of starting at the school. And it's not to say that you can't kind of now with our kind of second years and third years jump in and start doing that as well.
think also to sort of tag onto that, there's something about the education on the materials that we use. Because if you're teaching people to use materials that are inherently damaging to the planet at this level, they're gonna, that's gonna be their education, that's gonna be their understanding up until they're 60 years old. So it needs to be the change at this level to re-educate people who then go out into practice and then start putting things in place.
I think that's a really, both of those, well, all three of those perspectives are incredibly important. You know, the idea that yes, we absolutely need to embed this thinking right from the beginning into how we're approaching our pedagogies and our content. That we need to look and harness what it means to connect to these questions emotionally, how it affects us, how it, how we're carried along by a certain understanding and a will to change within that. And I guess, yeah, absolutely. That's really important, Jay, isn't it? That how and what we take forwards and we remember become our habits, don't they? So there's a crucial need to kind of develop new forms of habit, different forms of habit. And that's really
one of the ways that we could support that would be to bring, let's say, the tools and techniques of research much kind of earlier on in the curriculum. So at the moment, the traditional education, all educations, not just architecture, is to learn the established facts, assimilate them, deploy them, and then you go out and maybe develop a research career. I think because of the complexity of the challenges, I think that the introduction of research tools, in other words, kind of developing a critical perspective, being able to test ideas, figuring out how to go about dealing with the unknown, I think could be something that we could offer you earlier in the curriculum. So it's not to say that there are no facts and there are no things to learn. You learn them, but then you can be critical about them, and that you've got ways of contextualizing them in relationship to your own needs and interests. That's essentially research. It doesn't mean that you have to go on to do a PhD, and it doesn't mean that it's not valid when you go into practice. In fact, the way of conducting research will probably be with you for the whole of your life, so you don't get fixed habits and can't use different materials than what you've been taught how to use, and that your education is lifelong. And it's also empowered and informed. And I think that's really, if we could give you that kind of earlier in your, kind of a higher educational career, I think that might, just from listening to what you've been saying, maybe that might be something that's helpful for you.
Because I think if there's one thing that I've learned over the period of my career so far, Vincent, it's that I absolutely don't know anything. I just know maybe increasingly how to ask a few right questions. I think that's my reflection.
I think that sounds fair enough, really. Just to be able to ask those questions, I think, is one step on that journey, really.
Yeah.
I don't know, Sammy, are there any comments from the?
Yeah, we've got a few comments. We've got one from Brandon who's asked, "How do you think this will ultimately change culture in practice?" And he's added a personal anecdote. He says, "It feels when you get to commercial practice, it's difficult to push these things when the client has zero interest in environmental contributions and more costs and profit." So yeah, the question being, how do you think this will ultimately change culture in practice?
I think from my perspective, again, if we can empower you with the tools of research, then I would anticipate that every single one of you becomes a change agent. No one's going to say it's easy, but if you are empowered, then you will learn how to spot the strategic opportunities, even within the most resistant environments, and be able to initiate change and take a lead. So if you can initiate, people tend to follow. If you're waiting for someone to give you an opportunity or to tell you what to do, you might wait a long time. So that's why I think this, an approach of empowerment and an approach that supports you in making propositions and following them through, I think, could be something that then helps you make those cultural changes, even in the most difficult environments. And sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just have to make it a pass for right now and then wait for an opportunity when you can.
Yeah, I think I really echo that. And I just want to connect it back to one of the comments from the lunchtime session that we had today, which was a talk with artists Leah Miller and Rosie Morris, where we were asking what it means to design beyond the human. And the final question we had was, what would it mean to be a good ancestor? And I think one of the people in the YouTube chat posted a comment that what it might mean is to take or to become the owners of the means of production. You know, so it's a good old Marxist sort of sloganeering there, but in a sense, that's what you need to do. You need to go out into practice, and you need to then become the people that direct those practices. You need to establish those practices. You need to ask the questions of the politics of those practices. Do they align to the values that you see as taking forwards, you know, your ethical commitments? Where does the money go? Following the traces of it. Who do you work for? Asking those big political questions, as well as the smaller political questions, or the politics of a small p, not to say they're smaller, but those ones of how we relate within those practices. What kinds of cultures are you establishing? You know, I was struck by I think you were telling me, Vincent, about the action carried out by students looking at part one placements and talking about the actual experience of working in practice, and are they the types of practices you want to see your descendants working in, if you want to call it that? So I think really it's going out there and it's taking ownership of this space in the future with a set of values that you see aligning to ways of living that are not harmful and not extractivist, and don't inherently destroy this amazing space we have to live for our future generations. It was the Future Architects Front, which was the recent activist group that set up to. They've actually had a response now from the RIBA, and I think they were going to have a meeting with them, which sounded really positive and like it's moving in the right direction. But
yeah, there's
a
conversations happening.
Sammy, do we have any further questions?
Yeah, we've got two more. We've got one from Ellie who says, what would you suggest we do as individuals in order to have a positive impact on climate change?
I guess we'll come to Ed and Rachel perhaps for that as well. But for me, I can't really speak too widely about that. But I hope that you join us and come get involved in what we're doing. I know a bit of a plug that, isn't it? But
I was going to say, from joining this group in the last kind of month, we've all been having, I guess, quite a personal journey, kind of doing our own research and really educating ourselves. And I think when you kind of start looking for the things you're interested in, like on the social media, like Instagram's got loads of really interesting accounts. There's a lot of like intersectional accounts that kind of talk about kind of women and how we can kind of have an impact on climate change. There's like kind of intersectional diversity groups as well. So there's quite a lot that's going on. I think really kind of having a look at where you can find your information, you will kind of find what you're interested in. I think from that, when you're interested in it, you have much more kind of impact on wanting to learn more, and that kind of brings about change from that. And don't be scared to get things wrong as well, because I always think it's quite a big one. I think when we're talking about when you're in practice as well, like maybe in the workplace you can be like, you need to find the right time to kind of express your opinions, but kind of starting these conversations and making mistakes, like especially in education at the moment, we can use our kind of architectural projects to kind of test ideas, and it's kind of, I think it's a good chance to really work out what you are interested in, and that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah.
I think building on that, there's like this element as being architecture students of daring to conceive of alternate futures. That you don't have to take things for face value. You don't have to take the conventional styles at face value. I mean, whilst you're an architecture student, you have the ability to play around and to get things wrong. And as we keep trying to say, be optimistic and explorative of new materials, new ways to do things, because we're in such an unprecedented time of change. It feels like daring is going to be the only way to move forward and do new solutions.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, I listen, I don't know what the answer is to any of these questions, but I don't think there is a single answer or a thing to do in a sense. But I would completely echo what Kate has just said. You know, I think for me, there would be two recommendations just from my own experience. And it is exactly that. It is read. Listen to the voices of others, you know, particularly others that aren't you, you know, so me not reading all the stuff that white men read is probably a good start to this. Hearing the voices of where people are experiencing these impacts on their daily lives. And listening, I think, as well, listening to the younger generations. You know, you're in that band, but some of you are sort of edging at the upper end of it. But, you know, like, listen to the people that are young, right? I just think that for me is one of the most important things, because I think you hear a beautiful song of hope and possibility. You hear a song of sadness and alienation and dissatisfaction and loss. But you also get stuff that I just don't get. You know, I'm not connected into the sort of social media networks and channels in the way that people are. I don't have those same worldviews and positions to know what's going on. So I have to just listen. So I think for me, it's just listen and read, but not from your own subjectivity, I think.
Yeah, that's great. I think we can move on to the next one. We've got a question from Catherine, who's asked, how do you think NCan can step out to educate the wider school and local community as they educate themselves in climate matters?
Yeah, I think again that's a wonderful question, and I think it's sort of touching on some of those things that we were discussing before about the agency that students have, and I know we are students, so I guess we can only sort of speak for ourselves, but us working together, this is our education, we're the ones that are sort of paying to be here at this university, and so working together, I think we do have a voice, and we do have lots of agency to be able to put our views out there and demand better, really.
I think we're really responsible as well to help each other out. So when we've kind of started having these discussions, the amount you learn from your peers, and it's been quite a strange year and we don't really have the same experience. Like normally we're kind of in the studios and you bounce so many conversations and ideas off of each other. So I think from our perspective, kind of having set up NCan, we've had an opportunity to do that. Like Sammy was talking about, he's not really looked back at his kind of stage 5 project last year, and now we've had a look at it, and we've maybe got different opinions and different ideas about it, and kind of sharing ideas has been really useful. So I guess as a group we welcome other people to kind of start having these conversations, and any kind of, if you're interested in something that we're not having conversations about, then come and suggest them and teach us things as well.
Yeah, I think that's really key, that last bit about us teaching us things, is that we are, again, just a group of master's students, primarily from the same studio as well. So I guess going back to what Ed was talking about, that we're sort of one worldview, we've got a very specific worldview, I guess, in the scope of architecture and architectural students, and so we really do want those voices and those stories from across the school to come and help us as well be a more representative and collective body.
And I think even though it is super important to kind of find your voice as a student, it's also kind of the fact that you've got to remember not to lose that voice when you enter practice as a kind of young professional, especially when you're a part 1 or a part 2 or even a part 3. You can kind of feel like you are kind of at the bottom of the food chain. So it's just kind of remembering that if you are passionate about something and you keep talking, then people will listen, and you still do have a voice and can still kind of start some change.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, like we say, we're still evolving. We're really keen to hear from new members and expand our own ideas and just keep moving forward. We can take another question, I reckon. We've got one from, it's a random name, but what will you do to ensure that vulnerable groups are protected during the transition to sustainable construction methods? And he's given an example of construction workers who need new adaptation and communities who depend on energy intensive industries involved in the construction process.
Yeah, it's an incredibly interesting question. Incredibly interesting question. I don't know. We need to look at that. You know, the building construction and supply chain needs to look at that. It needs to be looked at holistically. It's an incredibly important question. Yeah, I think
the question before, we're always keen on these new perspectives. That's not something we've really thought about in our previous discussions. So again, a question like that just opens up a new conversation.
Absolutely. And I guess maybe part of the answer is looking beyond the disciplinary and professional boundary of what it means to be an architect. We see ourselves as separate from those people that go and make the thing, you know, and I think potentially that's one of the biggest problems that we face as a kind of Western architectural, idea, Western architectural practice, is that we've separated, becoming these professionals, we've separated ourselves from those that we contract to do the labor of making the spaces of our world. All we are really doing this job and doing this role of architects is we're making habitats, right? We're making habitats, but we design the habitats and then we ask somebody else to go and create them for us. And it's the same with many of our things in the world, you know, everything that we have, our technology, we don't make it, we design it and somebody else manufactures it. And you're totally right, that question, that the roles and relations and the power dynamics that are part of that being the professional and the relationships to those people that you commission, or, you know, you contract or you employ, or even you just do designs that may have impacts on people that have to go and work there, it's profoundly important. And it brings me back to what I've been watching as I've been sat here watching the builders, and, you know, and they're brilliant and doing things fantastically, you know, safe and everything like that. But what I've observed and realized is that architects write these instructions for the actions of humans to go and do things. It's a choreography. And within it are relations, right? So absolutely in there is thinking about the relations, thinking about what it means, thinking actually really that drawing that you do means that somebody who is loved in the world does something. And actually that's a really important reflection. I'm going to think a lot on that.
I think there's an issue of frameworks here, which is if we think about the modern architectural profession, it catalyzed modernity. So it invented new building types, it invented new processes, as Ed's just kind of fantastically described. And this is not to divest responsibility for an ongoing, let's say, welfare abuse and the exploitation of inequalities in the world. This is absolutely part of the Anthropocene, and it is not to kind of step down from any of that responsibility. But I think the way forward is to invent the new frameworks. And I think what's interesting here is you guys are standing on the cusp of creating new building types for the 21st century. And these may not be the buildings that we recognize in the 20th century. They may look like soils, public spaces, shorelines, ecosystems, and expressions of nature. Our impacts must be the same as nature. And in some ways then, you know, if we think about this, perhaps we're getting rid of the object as the building, and maybe we're no longer thinking about architecture as being a collective practice towards making buildings, but a practice of worlding the world. So our spaces and the spaces that we make are not disconnected from the rest of they're not disconnected from societies, they're not disconnected from nature, they're not disconnected from our families. And so, you know, the frameworks for thinking, as Ed has beautifully said, you know, need to involve care and value and different economies that underpin the practice of making space. Without an economy of value and care and a kind of reciprocal exchange between, you know, the way we inhabit space and what we give back to spaces, and that exchange, we're not going to change anything. All we're going to do is to change the rhetoric. We're going to make it sound a little bit more interesting for ourselves. We're going to step back from those responsibilities. So I think that at this moment in time, we cannot step away from a philosophy of architecture. In other words, the thinking about the thinking behind architecture. And until we change that, we change nothing.
Well,
but that, for me, says about the power of experiment. You know, we don't know what those answers are, but if these questions are and the things that we see around us feel unjust, then how do we step up to the plate to change that? Because we must step up, but we may not be able to step up all the time. But you know, kind of trying to help you guys, you know, make those strategic and bold interventions, I think, is absolutely part of the learning process. And I would love it if you said to me when you're kind of like 999 years old, and you know, I'm a little bit older than that, that you spent the entirety of your life learning. That would be, you know, a fantastic result.
That's really great, and thank you very much for all the answers and all the questions so far. I think we might have run out of time, sadly, but if there are any more questions, we would love to hear from you, and we'd just love all the students that are watching this to get involved. Again, plugging it again, but the WhatsApp link and the links to our socials are in the description of the YouTube video, and maybe Sammy will be able to put the links in the chat as well, just to get those across to you. I'd like to thank Ed and Rachel again for coming along, and we hope that this is the starting point for a really great discussion between us as the students and with you as the tutors. And we are really excited for this going forward, and we are thinking positively about what we can do. And
we hope you guys have all kind of enjoyed watching as much as we have, kind of doing the scary launch.
Yeah, it is a bit strange, isn't it, when I know Ed's in charge of the live setting, and it's just sort of somewhere in the world.
Yeah,
this is going
YouTube's really happening behind.
But yes, thanks very much again, and we do look forward to hearing from you, and forward to the rest of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, everyone, for hosting.